Hey folks, it's John Wilson at SOAR, and I cannot be more delighted to introduce our guest today for our webinar series. She is both a deeply respected colleague and over the years has become one of my most cherished friends, Elaine Taylor-Klaus with Impact ADD. And Elaine has written 2 books, and the latest book she's written really is quite extraordinary. And as I've had a chance to look through it, it really does provide some tremendous insights as to how to navigate what for parents is a difficult world. And to be perfectly honest, Elaine, I will be asking you some questions today that pertain to my family and my daughter. Because Elaine also happens to be an absolute world-class expert on ADHD in women and young girls, and having raised a couple and having been one yourself.
I was going to say, and myself, right?
That's right. So the book today that we're going to be looking at is The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD and Anxiety and More. And so with that, Elaine, my dear friend, welcome to our SOAR webinar series again. And
Thank
so
you.
we deeply appreciate you.
I am thrilled to be here. Just to have a time to sit and visit and talk about stuff that matters with you sounds like the best way to spend an afternoon.
I
I will
know.
tell you, I don't know if you caught the memo that Impact ADHD is now Impact Parents.
Oh, no, I didn't. Okay. Impact
Right? And
parents.
we have
I like it.
we expanded because we wanted to be more inclusive and reflect the full range of parents we're really supporting, that it's not just about kids with ADHD, but it's about kids with all of these range of complex issues. So we are now Impact Parents.
And we every time I give a lecture, or I go to a conference, or I speak on any capacity, folks say the stuff you're saying would work, works for everybody. And
Yeah.
and while I know that to be true, and it is true, our mission and our drive is really for this population. So
Yes.
Impact Parents, Elaine Taylor-Klaus, ladies and gentlemen, with Impact Parents. All right, well, let's jump into it because we only have an hour, and so in reviewing the book, I really love that you kind of started with 6 key challenge areas. All right, and you want to just briefly touch on those for me?
Yeah, without a visual, I'll do my best. but
Okay.
it's interesting because Diane and I started with this almost 10 years ago. We identified that these were the challenge areas that tend to show up in all families with complex kids. And what I'm beginning to realize is without complex kids in complex times, these are the areas, these are the buckets that we families are dealing with, right? And so we're dealing with organization issues, and we're dealing with logistics issues. And I distinguish them. Logistics is more like, the time of day related, getting out the door, getting the meals, that kind of getting homework turned in. And organization is a little bit more general management kinds of issues. We're dealing with relationships, and that's with ourselves, with each other, with our kids, with spouses, partners. And we're also dealing with the impact that having these complex kids has on us as the adults in their lives, whether we're teachers or parents. Um, we're not raising or educating the kids we thought we were going to be exploring life with. And so that has an impact on us, and we have to take that seriously and legitimate it and process that.
Well,
And then we're dealing with school and home issues, and then we're dealing with emotionality issues. So those are kind of the 6 buckets that I think
but
show up again and again.
one of those that I want to address, first off, is sort of that this isn't what I expected, and recognizing that raising these kids is going to require more from us than perhaps our neighbors are having to spend with their kids.
Yep.
I know that I dreaded going out to eat because it was always such a nightmare. Uh,
Yep.
I, you know, and so you have a chapter in your book. It's chapter 2. This is not what I expected. And one of the things I wanted you to speak to is, sometimes the common but unhelpful parenting reactions that we give, and what are sometimes the things that we say or that we do that that lead us in the wrong direction.
So I love that. I call it the parenting police. So you're being way more generous than I am. But you go out and you can feel the eyes on you, right? As you are just doing your best to help your child cope with wherever you are. And I think that what happens is that well-intended, loving family members and friends and neighbors begin to give us advice as parents, trying to be helpful. They really do intend to be helpful, but they just don't understand. And I remember distinctly this moment with I have a friend sister in my life. We've kind of raised our kids together. And I remember saying to her once when she said, "You just need to," right? Whatever it was after that, it didn't matter. You just need to. You need to be more disciplined. You just need to say no. You just need to make her, right? Whatever it was, I remember looking at her and crying and saying, "You really just don't understand. It just doesn't work that way."
It 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 doesn't, and there have been some painful moments.
Yeah.
Um, I remember one particular moment we were out to eat, and this gentleman came over and he whispered in my wife's ear as he was leaving the restaurant, and her face just went completely white, and then tears. She didn't say anything, but just
Oh,
tears started streaming down her eyes. And what he had, he basically scolded her for not having more control over her children.
right.
Um,
Yeah. So
yeah.
here's a parallel to that story. When I stopped caring about what other people think, right, which is part of the game here, is that we have to let go of the mind I forget the language that makes most sense. um, when we're working about reputation management, right, we have to let go of our own reputation management so that we can really be fully attentive to what does this kid need and how can I support them, right?
So, so in chapter 3 of your book, you begin to talk about the change starts with you, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and these are the things, and this mindset that that many families will come and say, I've tried everything. No, you haven't tried everything, right? And and there were things that you tried that didn't work, but now will work.
Yes.
And speak to that just a little bit about how we embark on that journey as parents to really examine how we're going to approach our kids and the things that we want and the goals that we're driving at in a way that begins with centering about our expectations and how we're going to interact with our kids.
Well, and that's the key, right? Is it starts with us, and we start off parenting. I think, um, we're the director, we're in charge, we're helping them figure out what their motivation is, and and then and we have a lot of expectations. We have a lot of the world shoulds on our shoulders. We know how our parents did it, and we either want to do it like them or we don't want to do it like them. We see our siblings or our friends, and it's hard not to compare ourselves to how other people are parenting because most of us don't really know what we're doing and we're kind of making it up as we go along. And so you look to others as kind of a barometer for how am I doing? And I think that at first that makes sense. And then it becomes an obstacle to being able to be really present to the family you've got because everybody's experience is unique. And particularly when you have complex kids, what they need is very different and often very different from each other. And so when we start off thinking we're having kids and it's about us, at some point in that journey, we figure out it's really not about us at all. It's really about them. And the way to help mold them to become their best self, which I think is our goal, is to keep ourselves out of it so that we can become present to guiding them and supporting them based on what they need, not what we need from them or for them. And that's the distinction. There's a guy named Hal Runkle who wrote a book called Screen Free Parenting, which I love or loved when my kids were little. And it's a great book. It doesn't completely address the issues of complex kids. And part of what I was trying to do in this book is to create a general parenting book for the non-general kid, right? For parents who are dealing with complex kids. But one of the things he talks about is that when we get upset with our kids, what we're really doing when we scream at them or lose it with them is screaming at them, calm me down, right? Because when we're upset, that's about us, not about them. And so the biggest challenge and opportunity I think in parenting is when we realize that it's really not about it's not about our experience of it. It's about what do these beings need from us, and how do we need to respond or create an environment to help them be as successful as possible. And that's a shift, because when we first have kids, we're the ones having kids. We do it for us,
You know,
right? And
my,
then at some point it changes.
my parents were just so delighted when I became an instructor at SOAR, because I was going to have to deal with kids like me.
Right.
Oh, the hell you will reap after all the challenges you've caused us. And
Yes.
and I remember how frustrated my dad was that I was good at it, right? That, but
Well,
but
you had some experience with it.
but being, again, but being a parent, like now, my daughter said, "Don't talk about me in your webinar today." And I said, "No, trust me, I'm going to be talking about you, because you know she is a classic example of this kid. She is bright and smart and amazing, and this beautiful personality, and she's a talented artist, and there are courses that she's in honors in.
Yeah.
She's on the cheer squad, and from the outside looking in, you'd say that girl's got it all. And she is riddled with self-doubt and
Yeah.
riddled with anxiety, and gets down on herself in a way that is just profound.
Yep.
And while she is thriving in some classes, she's absolutely doing miserable in other classes. And this virtual world has been crushing for her. And she feels alone and isolated.
Yeah.
And so,
Sorry.
and it's hard, because this is one of those times where mom and dad are working, and we're out of the house, and these kids are having to self-govern themselves, and it's really, really difficult. And
It
so
is.
we are having to relearn how to parent to a degree in this new environment, providing structures in place. I'll move off of this here in a second, but now we're looking at her assignments, and we're looking at them every night to see what's been done. And we've turned the patio window into this giant marker board, and we're crossing
Awesome.
things off, and going over and looking at those things. And while she was really resistant to that, she found it super helpful. And
Yeah.
so now our challenge as parents are going to be following through and doing that every day, right?
So
And then
yeah.
and then not worrying about the fact that that other kids are thriving, or that that other parents are what they're saying about their kids. And you just have to take what you're given and really
Yeah.
focus. I'm going to
Yeah.
segue, because
So
I
can I address what you said real quick before you
sure,
segue?
sure,
Because what you're speaking to, one of the things I talk about in the book, and that Diana and I teach a lot, is the 4 phases of parenting.
that's what I was going to segue to,
Awesome.
Diane.
Okay. First,
I mean,
perfect.
Elaine.
So what you're speaking to is the 4 phases.
Mhm.
And so there are 4 phases we all move through ideally in the parenting. Some people get stuck in phase 1, maybe phase 2, but as we move through them, the goal is to begin to transfer ownership to our kids more and more. But what you just described is a perfect example of a kid who may have been a little bit more independent, who may have been ready for you to be more in phase 3 and kind of on her own, and you're just in a support role. And then COVID hit. And because of that, she needed you to step back into phase 2 parenting and be more collaborative and involved with her until she can get back on top of it. And the goal, the idea would be to keep collaborating with her until she's ready for you to be back in that support role with her. So it may not be that it stays here, but to recognize she needed something different and be able to shift, not to say, well, you should be able to do that, but to say the conditions are different, the environment is different, and I need to approach it differently. That's the mark of excellent parenting, by the way.
Oh,
So you can tell her I said that. But truly, like that's the challenge, is to give ourselves permission to meet them where they are and to know that that's constantly changing.
so for those of you at home that are listening, phase 1 is motivate effort and direct work. Phase 2 is motivate ownership and model organization.
And we call that collaboration phase.
I love collaboration. By the way, for those of you that are dealing with really tougher kids, either strong-willed kids or kids who really kind of push the envelope, I would strongly encourage you to look at what some of the work that Ross Green is doing with collaborative parenting.
Well, and that's what this is too,
Yeah,
John. That's
absolutely.
exactly what this model is designed to help you to manage.
Phase 3 is transfer ownership and support, like she mentioned again. And then phase 4 was empower, champion, and troubleshoot. Now we have a chat from Sarah. She wants us to go through the phases again. Phase 1, tell us phase 1. Motivate.
So phase 1 is motivate,
Yeah.
right? It's phase 1, you're in director seat, right? You as the parent are the director. You're holding the agenda and setting the stage. Phase 2 is when you begin collaboration. So now you're sharing the agenda, you're beginning to help your child begin to take ownership of the agenda, but you're still sharing it. You're still on some level in somewhat of an ownership position. Phase 3 is you as a parent move into a support role. So now it's their agenda and you're supporting them in it. And phase 4 is champion. They're doing their thing and you're the one saying, "Atta girl, go get them," right?
And it's interesting. Our academy model really kind of follows that. In phase 1, they're coming in, we're teaching them the skills necessary, we're encouraging them to learn how and get motivated about the things that we're doing. In phase 2, we start having them collect input and create the tribs. In phase 3, we begin to transfer ownership, and hopefully by the end we're just driving the van, holding on to the first aid kit, and they're running the program.
Exactly.
So
That's the goal.
that's the goal.
But then at some point, if something happens, you got to be willing to jump back into 3 or jump back into 2 if they need you to, right? They need to know there's a safety net.
I like the idea of that. I really do, because I think that it's important. One of the other things that you had mentioned as well was, and I've talked about it before, but Equal Town versus Fairville, right? My son, my son was getting on my case how things didn't seem fair and equal with how I was approaching my daughter versus how, if this had been me, you would have been, and I,
Right.
and I said to him, listen, buddy, I don't make choices, based on, what you believe is Equal Town. What I'm trying to do is figure out a way to maximize the opportunity and get the very best from you and get the very best from her. And sometimes those are not the same thing. I don't know that
I used to say to my kids all the time, you have to trust me that each of you is going to get what you need and you are not going to need the same thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's
You're
it.
just not. You're different people. You're going to need different things. And my job is to make sure each of you gets what you need.
Well, as we move into part 2 of your book, we start to talk about the impact model. All right.
Yes.
You want to share a few words about that before we keep going?
Sure. So the impact model is it's based on the methodology of professional coaching. So it comes from the coaching world and from the world of change management in the workplace, actually. It's all about behavior change. And what we know is that behavior change happens when you start by getting very clear on the change you want to see in the first place. So in our model, step 1, we call it take aim. The more specific you can get, the better. And you have to know what's the change you want before you can start putting systems in place. The biggest mistake that parents of complex kids make is that they start with the end. They start with the solution. Here, let me put a reward chart in place. Here, let me put a system in place for you to get your homework done. But you haven't gone back and started at the beginning to say, okay, what's the real problem with schoolwork, or where's the breakdown happening? So you got to start by taking aim as specifically as possible on a change you want to see. So it wouldn't be taking aim on mornings, but it might be taking aim on getting out of bed or setting an alarm or getting your teeth brushed or whatever it is. I've had a lot of parents who have taken aim on helping kids manage their emotions in the morning with their siblings before medicine is on board, for example, like very specific to a specific time and place. So first you take aim.
Getting through breakfast.
Say it again.
Getting through breakfast without a giant squabble. Yeah.
Right. So it's actually start of breakfast, right before food is in. So because that it's when they're still hungry that they're hangry, right? That's when the emotions come out. So you want to start by taking aim. Step 2 is to collect information, is to get informed, to really look contextually at what's happening when we have a problem, to understand the nuances of it, to understand what the different perspectives are, what's happening for your child, what's happening for you, maybe what's happening for the teacher, so that you're not operating in a vacuum, but you're really fully informed. And then you move into the planning phase. And in planning, we have 4 sections. What you'll see in almost any classic parenting program, you're going to talk about positive parenting. And what we do that just like everybody else does, right? What's different here is we also look at the role that the brain is playing in the dynamic. So we call it activating the brain, um, which is understanding executive function and understanding what's happening with that in order to create problem solving, a problem solving process. You can't address the problem if you don't really understand what's going on. So we want to look at what's happening in the brain. We want to stay in a positive place and take a positive perspective. And then I think what differentiates this model from a lot of other models is we want to look at shifting expectations. Our kids are developmentally 3 to 5 years often delayed behind their same age peers. So we want to set expectations based on where they are developmentally, not where we think they should be chronologically, right?
And
So that's a big shift.
that's managing your own expectations, right? And that goes back
Exactly.
to recognizing, understanding that you're bringing a bag of stuff to all of this, and that they should be here, but they're not. And so when you do that, you're shooting on them, you're shooting on yourself, and
Yep.
let's stop shooting on ourselves.
Exactly.
Um,
So the idea is to shift expectations. We want to be really clear. We're not lowering them because these kids are incredible and they have amazing capacity. We just got to help them get there, and you can't do that by setting the bar so high that they eventually give up. So we want to shift expectations, and then we want to create systems and structures that work in a way that works for these kids. It's not enough to just put a system in place. There's really an art to designing a system collaboratively with a kid, to making sure it works for everyone, to getting their buy-in. There's a lot of pieces involved that really help make a system work effectively. So those are the basic steps in the model before we ever get to taking action, or what we call rinse and repeat, which is starting over. Because one of the things, whenever you put a new system or strategy or tool in place, is you want to start with the expectation that it's not necessarily going to work the first time. Right. And this goes to what you were saying at the very beginning of our conversation, is that just because you've tried it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that when you tried it, then it didn't work. And so rinse and repeat gives you a space to go back and say, okay, what part did work? What didn't work? What do you want to tweak or modify or change? And now let's try it again, because that's really what it takes to put systems in place. Is it takes a little bit of maneuvering, and we have to be willing to do that and teach our kids, walk them through the process of problem solving so that they learn not to just give up the first time they try something, but that trying something means sticking with it and figuring it out.
a little bit later, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about systems and taking a systems approach, because I believe that when you look at things from a systems approach, you certainly begin to take some of the emotionality out of it, and
Yeah.
start becoming a better problem solver. But before we do that, you know, I saw that, you know, that one of the things that you do in your book is you, and I appreciate it very much, because I do the same thing, is you encourage families and parents to understand they are the expert in their child. Nobody knows
Yeah.
their kid better than they do. And you have to come, as you are coming to grips with who you are as a parent and honoring that. You also have to say, okay, these are the areas that I can grow, but this is what I know about my kid, and now I'm going to start taking kind of an approach to that. And so um,
Yeah.
now, as we do that, though, you know, and you're taking a micro, tiny look at how to manage particular situations, it really is all about motivation, about trying to create the external locus of control and nurture the intrinsic motivation to help kids get motivated to do what you want them to do. You talk
Or
about
to
that.
get motivated to want to do
That's right. That's right.
what you want them to do.
Because kids don't have a "that was easy" button, right? You know,
Nope.
and so speak to that for just a moment.
I think it's sort of the core of all of this, is that it's fine if we have a vision of what we want our kids to do, but if they don't share that vision, or if they don't have a vision for themselves, or if they have a vision that's very different, then you're going to end up in a battle of the wills. And the goal behind this approach really is to start with a recognition that you are raising an autonomous, independent human being,
What?
and your job is to help guide them to become the expert on themselves. Right? You don't want to get to a point when they're 18 years old and you're the expert on this kid, and this kid doesn't do anything for themselves because they don't need to, because why should they? Because you've got it all. Like that is the worst place to be. And we are seeing this happening again and again and again with kids in their late teens and early 20s who are failing to thrive in life because the parents have kind of paved the way. They were afraid to let them falter or stumble for a moment, or they were afraid for it not to get done, so they just did it. And really we have to shift that mindset to understand that part of growing up is going to be faltering and failing and falling. And like, my favorite parenting book of all times was a book called The Blessings of a Skinned Knee by Wendy Mogul. And it's really essential for us as parents not to just let them fail, but to allow them to experiment and problem solve and try and falter in a supported environment where they learn to pick themselves up and cultivate resilience, and they learn to get back up on the horse and try again instead of just giving up because they can't figure out how to do it the first time.
So I saw an interaction. It was about a year and a half ago at a boat ramp that really stuck with me. And it was a dad who was backing up the boat, and he let his young boys then be the ones that were in charge of collecting the boat as it came off the boat and tying it to the dock. And they had some trouble with it, and but they eventually got it. There was some banging around, but it was okay. Well, somebody walked up to him, and I oversaw the interaction, and they said, that seemed like a really poor choice to have your kids doing that unsupervised. Why on earth would you do that? Why would you put them in that situation? And this
Parenting police.
and this was his response. He said, well, first of all, how and why I choose to parent my children is none of your business. But
Fair.
that aside, if I had made a choice to do all of that for them, I would have deprived them of the opportunity to learn from that experience.
That's right.
All right.
Yep.
And I love that. I love that when you create opportunities for kids to scrape their knees. And we just went through that with my son Jay. I could have filled out the FAFSA without him, right? But he drove that process because uh, he's going to be doing that for the next 4 years. I don't want him calling me and saying, okay, Dad, what was that password? Dad, what's that information? And so that was a really critical opportunity for him to begin to develop some of those skills in life, to work through that important information.
And he has the motivation. The key that I would build on that with is that if we can pay attention to where our kids are motivated to try, to explore, to test, that's key, because these kids were probably highly motivated to park a boat or dock a boat or whatever. Like, that's kind of cool.
Go fishing,
right? What a great opportunity for them. I can think of experiences with my kids where I've given them the chance to skin the knees to figure it out, and I can think about times where I've said, okay, I'll hold this for you and I'll keep doing this while you tackle that, because we want to set them up for success, and we want them to continue to find their motivation and to explore growing and moving forward. And we want to make sure we're not trying to get them to do it all at once, because that's totally overwhelming, and then that sets them up for failure. So we want to, it's this dance between giving them autonomy. I've been using this metaphor a lot this year, about transferring the reins when you're riding a horse. If you hold the reins too tight when you're riding a horse is not going to go anywhere. Horse is just going to stand there because they can't. You're pulling back on them. But if you make the reins too loose, the horse doesn't have any clue what direction to go. So there's a real art to navigating it. And when we're trying to transfer the reins to our kids, we want to make sure that we pass the reins, that there's enough loose, for them to take the reins, and then for them to have some chance to practice before, and to figure out. If we're the ones holding the reins, they can't do that.
Uh, Another fun Landry moment that I'll insert
Okay.
here is one of the assignments that she has to catch up on is making a French dish. All right. And so I could guide that process, but instead I said, you know what? I'm your sous chef.
Yes.
And so what she had me whisking the egg whites, and I
Well,
whisking, because it's hard to do it,
I
and
was going
she
to say,
said,
did she
okay,
come to you and say, not enough, keep going?
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I get one time. She's like, nope, it's not peaking, Dad.
Nope.
Well, the moose turned out amazing, and
I bet.
and so we had fun with that. But there's a larger picture there. Be your child's sous chef on occasion. Let them be the one who is directing you, right?
Absolutely. And there's nothing kids love more than to direct us and to tell us what we're doing well and what we're not. We have a in Insanity School, which is a behavior therapy online training program that we teach. In module 2, it's all about executive function and activating the brain. And there's a kind of an exercise that we walk parents through, and we encourage them to print out this worksheet and to have their kids grade them first, right? Because there's nothing a kid, and I've had families with kids as young as 6 years old do this exercise. There's nothing a kid likes better than to say, you're good at that, Mom, but you really need to work on managing your emotions over there. They love that kind of stuff.
Well, let's use managing emotions as our segue to our next topic,
Okay.
which is, it's not what you say, but how you say it.
Mm.
And what is it? 85% of our communication is nonverbal,
Nonverbal.
and
Yeah.
facial expressions, tone of voice, gesticulations, right? And so, understanding that, that they're sometimes my kids are triggered simply by the approach I take, not the words I'm saying.
Yes.
Do you want to speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah, I think I think we don't realize. I cannot tell you how often I remember in hindsight my kids saying, well, she was yelling at me, or don't yell at me, or stop yelling at me. And I'm looking around like, who's yelling? Right. But their experience of it is what matters. It's not what you say, it's how they perceive what you say. Right. And so if you're a little bit agitated or frustrated or irritated or incredulous, they're going to hear it. They're going to read it or absorb it. They're sponges. They don't miss a thing. Right.
We
And
get,
the incredulous is the one that I think we miss the most when we're like, can't you figure that out? Oh my God. We forget they're not adults, right? They're growing beings and they don't have the experience we have. And so we often inadvertently say things like, you're such an idiot to our kids without ever saying it.
I right now we're trying to come up with some new solutions to help Landry with virtual school. And one of the things that I like to do is contract with my kids. And so she wrote an essay to us, and the first paragraph was some things that she felt she could do differently, and that amount was this, and then the second paragraph, which was much bigger, were these are the things I think you're doing wrong as
Right.
parents, and I want you to stop. And so much of that was tone of voice, was getting on to me, was the approach we take in offering correction.
Yeah.
Um, we have an attendee that's asked, but what about in areas where they do have certain things, but are just not motivated to do them, such as showering or being clean? Do you want to answer that?
Well, so two things that come up. So let me answer that, and then I want to address that other thing you were just saying, if I can remember what it was. So one of the biggest issues that comes up, most common, that Diane and I have noticed over the last decade, is brushing teeth, showering, towels off the floor. Like, it's the mundane stuff, right? And there's a lot of reasons that a kid could be struggling to do the mundane stuff. And so part of what we would say is using our model is you want to start back at the beginning and try to understand what's behind the problem with the behavior, because it's not that they can't shower, it's that they're not motivated to. So why not? Is it that they forget? Is it they don't like the feeling on their skin? Is it boring? Is it like what's going on? If the more you can understand what's going on with mundane things, the more you can create some friction to help people get it done. If ADHD is a factor, for example, boring is the enemy of the ADHD brain. And so sometimes when something has too many steps or is too just uninteresting, there's not enough motivation. We have to find something to make it quicker or make it more motivating. Example, I have, and I am not kidding you, I have 3 toothbrushes and 2 or 3 different toothpastes at any given time. I find brushing my teeth to be a very boring experience. So I every morning I can decide which toothpaste do I want to use. That gives me a little bit of interest and a little bit of novelty to make it something I'm more inclined to do, because otherwise it's kind of boring.
Have you
And
tried the
that's not to say
musical
that
toothbrush? It plays, it
when the
plays
kids
the
were
song.
little,
They're
I
great.
mean, right, see, you gotta find what motivates you, what's interesting to you, what's compelling to you. And with our kids, oftentimes, if they're not doing something that's really mundane, then when you get to the bottom of it, what you'll likely discover is either there's a working memory issue, there's an ambiguity issue, there's something that's not clear about them, and maybe they're not clear why it's important, or there's boringness. Usually what we see is those hygiene issues begin to improve when they get to an age when there are love interests involved,
It matters. Yeah,
and that's when it matters to them. Until then, like, why should they care?
yeah.
And so if you can't help them come up with a reason for it to care, then you're going to have to, help them find a way to make it sticky, to give them a little bit of friction so that they can get it done.
I like that. All right. Did you say you wanted to speak to the other?
Yeah, but I can't remember what it was anymore. What were we talking about?
We were we were talking about the list, Landry's big list of things for us that she wanted us to do differently.
Are
Uh-oh.
we still there?
Yep, we got you back.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Landry, the short list of things that she wanted to change and her big long list of things that
Oh,
she
I know what I was going to
wanted
say.
us to
Great.
stop doing.
So there's a concept. I don't know if this is in the book or not. I think it might be, but not sure. But I'll share it with you. The notion is called designing a relationship. It's a fabulous technique. There's definitely an article on my site called Relationships by Design that explains it, and it's a classic coaching construct. So the notion of a design is that whenever you want to talk about something you're trying to work out together, or conflicts resolve or problem solve, there's 2 pieces to the design. There's the gift and the ask. So you start with the gift and then you make the ask. So the gift might be, um, uh, I, I I get that what you're trying to do is to support me in a way that's really like you're trying to encourage me to get my schoolwork done. And the ask, this might be a child saying it, the ask might be, can you try to do it with a tone of voice that's not offending me? Right. I used to do it with my kid. You can count on me. So the gift is often, you can count on me to remind you when it's time to take the trash out to the street. And my request of you is that when I remind you, you stop what you're doing and do it at that time so I don't have to remind you again. When you start with a gift, you defray a lot of defensiveness, and it really helps to get buy-in when you start by saying, I'm happy to do this. You can count on me to be a good advocate for you in school. And I just need you to let me know when you're struggling with something and you need some help, right? When you start with a gift, your kids are less likely to be defensive and more likely to collaborate with you. It's just
I,
a good little tool.
I think that's a tremendous tool, and I deeply appreciate that. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is setting appropriate expectations and consequences. And again, you segue into that quite nicely as well, and that is that creating those lists of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, the expectations. And I think that sometimes when you say create some, was it friction?
Mhm.
And let's talk about that for just a second, because I think so much of parenting is that balance between lifting them up through nurturing and positive encouragement, and then also establishing appropriate consequences and then following through.
Right. Which is the hardest, most important part. So one of the things I've really come to learn, and I really figured this out actually when I was writing the book. It was an aha insight for me as I was writing the book, is that we use the term consequences often when we're not really talking about consequences, we're talking about punishments. We think that if by calling it a consequence, that somehow we're not punishing them. But a consequence only works if it's an opportunity for people to make a choice. So a consequence has to be identified in advance. You have to know what the consequence is going to be so that you can make the choice. I'm going to turn in my homework or not turn in my homework. If I don't, I know I'm going to lose 10 points, right? That's clearly identified in advance. But what often happens as parents is that our kids do something that makes us upset. And then we go, okay, I'm going to take your phone. I'm going to take your internet. I'm going to take, right? And we start taking things away and we say, well, that's a consequence of your behavior. But if they didn't know in advance that that was going to be the result, then it's not actually a consequence, it's a punishment. And
I
and I
agree.
think it's really important for us to begin to see it differently, to understand that consequence is identified in advance and clearly articulated, and at least to some extent agreed upon. That's what makes it a consequence. The best consequences are the natural consequences, because those are the ones that that happen where nobody has any control about it. Like, whether it's school related, or you don't study for your driver's test, you fail your driver's test, you failed your driver's test. The
Right.
parent doesn't have responsibility. The key to a true consequence is that I often say, let the system be the bad guy. If you have a true consequence in place, then you as a parent get to stay on your kid's team. You get to be compassionate and supportive and understanding, and oh, I'm so sorry you have to deal with that consequence, instead of being the authoritarian standing up there saying, see, I told you. Because they're not learning anything when you say, see, I told you. But when you're saying, man, I'm so sorry you have to deal with that, now they feel you on their team and they understand that consequence is something they're responsible for, not that you're imposing on them.
I have said that, if you create an agreement with your child and you both are in alignment with that agreement, and then the thing happens and the consequence has to happen, you can say, oh man, I I wish it wasn't so, but we both
So
agreed this was
sorry.
going to be the. Now my kid,
You let the system be the bad guy.
right, my
But
kid
then what happens is a lot of parents will rescue their kids from the consequence,
yeah,
and that's when you lose your authority.
it's
Yeah.
true. My kids have found that to be a little disingenuous with me, however, because they sometimes they see the open delight that I have.
I
That
was going to say, this may go back to tone of voice, John.
yeah, well, someone, Candace mentioned tone of voice as an important ingredient in nonverbal communication, but but
Yeah, I think tone of voice and non-judgment,
yeah,
like truly coming from a place of non-judgment.
I think that sometimes, even if you don't have a natural consequence, if you can create some sort of logical sequence between this and that, that there can be power in that.
Mhm.
For instance, the reason I'm removing your phone from you is because you are spending an inordinate amount of time on your phone, which you should be spending on these other things. And so I need to see these things occur before you have access to this privilege. And but just arbitrarily, I didn't like what you did, so I'm taking your phone from you, is again, you're right. That's just simply punishment. Let's
Yeah.
move on to the idea of systems, because we alluded to that earlier. Looking at situations from a systems point of view, right? Something's not working. Let's figure out why it's not working. Let's figure out what we're going to do differently, and apply that to a systems approach. I use it as an executive director in my organization, that I try and have systems that remove the fallibility of people out of it when possible.
And you
Um,
can. Yep.
and then always, tweaking, adjusting, shifting, moving, having conversations about the systems, which make it about what's happening and how it's happening versus what you did wrong, what's wrong with you.
Right. Yep. So I mean, we could spend an entire hour on systems and
Whoa,
structures,
did you
right?
just agree to do
Because
another webinar on systems?
we could. That'd be fun. That'd be a great thing to do. So the thing about systems, here's where I feel like particularly the ADHD community kind of gets it backwards. So what we're talking about, what this book teaches, is a model for collaborative problem solving. Much like Ross Greene's, ours comes not from a therapeutic world, but from a coaching world. Very, very similar framework. Is we want to be collaborating with our kids in a constant process of problem solving. That's the bigger picture of what this is all about. And when we're solving problems, we're developing and coming up with systems and structures and tools that help us address the problems of our lives, whatever that is. What happens in the ADHD community in particular is that we tend to start by saying, I need a system for that. I need a problem. I need to solve this problem. Give me a solution. And when we start with the solution without going through the process, like I talked about with the model of understanding what the problem is and understanding the perspectives around it, then we end up looking at the solution as if it's the goal. And a system isn't the goal. The goal is to address whatever the problem is. A system is a tool to help us address that goal. And so one of the things, and this is really nuanced, but so important, is to not allow systems and structures to become the goal in and of itself. I don't care if you use a reward chart. I do care that you're acknowledging your kids' behavior, catching them being good, celebrating their successes, holding them accountable for things they're responsible for. Those are the purposes you might use a reward chart. And so you don't want it to be about the chart, right? I ended up with my family, the best reward chart I ever came up with was a single piece of paper with 3 columns with one of each kid's names on top of the column. That was it. That was my system. Because what my family needed was the simplest thing possible. My kids learned how to do hash marks and to count and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 because they would do something and I'd say, great job, go give yourself 2 points. That was our system. It's not what any professional would have given me as a system to use. But the point of the system was not to have a system. The point of the system was to reinforce positive behavior and hold them accountable for behaviors we want to improve.
What you just said was so critically important. Another dear friend of mine is an early child specialist. She runs all of the child care centers for the University of Texas across all their campuses. And one of the things that she said over and over and over when my kids were young was, you get more results out of affirming the positive than focusing on the negative. You get better results when you talk about what you want versus what you don't want. You get more action out of saying something like, oh, I really appreciate the way you're playing so nicely with such and such versus I don't want you hitting anybody. And
exactly.
and I recognize that in particular with my kids, they really deeply appreciate my catching them doing things right. Hey, buddy. Mm-hmm. And one of the major changes that I've taken in the last couple of years, and I've mentioned this in many of the webinars that I've given, is that there are 15 minutes in the day that are precious to me. The first 5 minutes with my kids and my spouse, the first 5 minutes when I get home from work and interacting with them after being with them, and then the last 5 minutes. Those times I'm going to focus on creating positive interactions and being positive with my kids.
I love that.
All right. So in chapter 11, you start to talk about cultivating ownership, as we're moving into phase 4 of parenting, and letting it become
phase 3, phase 4. Yeah.
Phase 3, phase 4, as it becomes to kind of own it. Give us, just a quick snippet of that. And then I've got one final question for you before we open it up to any questions that folks may have and the attendees. And folks, if you have questions, you can put those up at any time. I'm going to go through them here with Elaine, and we will work through all of your questions until the webinar is complete. But Elaine, will you talk a little bit about that for me?
So I think I lost the question. So talk about cultivating ownership. Okay. So, you mentioned a little while ago, kids don't have a just get it done button. Our kids are not motivated by putting something on a list and crossing it off. They are they're not motivated by doing something because it's good for them, or because we think they should, or because one day you're going to need to do this. Those don't resonate for kids, any kids. I'm not even talking about neurotypical or not. And so part of, again, our job as parents is to help them begin to see themselves as the leader of their own life. We want them to see their own sense of ownership. We want them to see their own sense of agency in life. And if they believe that they're capable of making decisions and have a role of making decisions and are part of that process, that's something they're going to be prepared to do in life and not feel scared of when they get to that point when you're not around and they really do have to make these decisions on their own. So ownership is absolutely essential to getting them to begin to practice problem solving and feel competent in their own capacity.
All right. My last, point for you is kind of bring it home. Your last chapter in the book is how do I know if it's working? So bring us home. Tell us, how do we know if what we're doing is working?
I think if what you're doing is working. I guess there are two things. One is if you have a relationship with your kid. If you have those if those 5 minutes, 15 minutes throughout the day, when you engage with your kid, say good morning, say good afternoon, say good evening to your kid, if those feel precious to you, then you're probably doing something right. It's about connection and it's about relationship. And it's probably, we always say, if you don't know where to focus, there are two choices and two choices only. One is self-care and the other is lean into relationship. Because nothing else matters if you don't have a relationship with your kid, because that's what the trust is built on. And that's what's going to allow them to come to you when there's a problem, when something's happening that's not safe, when they're afraid or scared or need help. So relationship is the key to all of it. And, we have parents that come to us a lot of times with fractured relationships. And so a lot of the work is how do we begin to repair, particularly with those difficult kids and oppositional kids and that kind of thing. Sometimes we have parents who come who have already a really good relationship with their kids, but they don't know how to move from phase one into the next phases of parenting. And so that would be the other thing. How do you know if it's working? If you don't feel like it's all on your shoulders.
Oh, I love that.
You are beginning to realize that this is not really about you and it's not up to you. It's about how am I supporting my kid in helping them begin to make decisions and see choices for themselves. And that really, when your relationship is there, the next thing to look at is do I feel the pressure, or do I feel for them that the pressure is on them? And I don't mean to say it's all pressure, but the idea is that they see it as theirs and you see it as theirs.
So I have two folks have put up questions. The first is, how do you help a child who compares themselves to siblings who seem to excel at everything?
Oh, that's so hard, isn't it? We talked a little bit earlier about this notion that I'm going to treat each of you with what you need and give each of you what you need, and it's not going to be the same thing. And I think usually when you've got a sibling who excels at everything, and then one who doesn't, one of the kids has got complex issues and the other doesn't. And I believe in being really transparent about it and understanding what the gifts are and the challenges. We are pretty, we have a rough relationship with being authentic around kids when they have issues like ADHD or anxiety or depression. We tend to, we don't talk about it a lot because we don't want them to use it as a crutch, or we're afraid that it'll hurt their self-concept. But if we don't help a kid understand what they're overcoming, they will have a harder time overcoming it. And what they make up about themselves is a lot worse than the truth. They will make up that they're lazy, crazy, or stupid. So it's really important that we be honest and transparent with kids about what they're struggling with and what the achievements we're seeing them doing and overcoming it. And you know, begin to take that same bar we were talking about, not comparing us to our family and our friends. And it's the same thing with these kids, is helping them see what the opportunity is and what they are doing that's so amazing and overcoming. I mean, I have a kid with dyslexia who has ADHD and anxiety as well as dyslexia. She's the highest quote achiever in my house. She works harder, she's determined, she's a fabulous self-advocate. And she is that human being in part because, you know, from a very early age, we started saying, it's harder for you to do this than it is for other kids. And look at what you've achieved. Look at what you were able to accomplish. Let's look at what worked for you and help you apply that in other areas. And so when we help the kids who have challenges see what they've already accomplished just by getting up and getting out the door in the morning, that's a lot.
Well, let me vouch for the fact that I know that to be true, because I think the world of that young lady, and I saw her invest when she worked here at SOAR in remarkable ways, and her ability to self-advocate and advocate for her kids was tremendous. All right, our final question is, do you have favorite tips or tricks to help manage kids with anxiety?
Oh, God, I've been doing a lot more about anxiety. In fact, when we expanded into Impact Parents, we opened up an entire blog called Impact Anxiety. So we pulled all the blogs that we had done over the years that were about anxiety and put them there. So that's one, is I would guide you to the blog and to the resource of Impact Anxiety, because there's a lot there. God, do I have a favorite? That one's I just wrote a piece last week about my own social anxiety and discovering it in my 50s and realizing how much of an impact it had on me, on my life. And I'm doing a lot of work right now, sort of recognizing the piece that anxiety has played over the years in a lot of the different issues that we've dealt with. I think it's really powerful. It's really, really strong right now, which is maybe why I'm playing with it so much. I think we need to acknowledge it and call it what it is. And I remember having a conversation with that same fabulous young adult we were talking about a minute ago. I remember sitting on the stairs with her, and she was kind of hysterical. She was in high school, about a paper that she couldn't figure out how to get it going and she couldn't choose the topic, is really what it was. And I finally looked at her and I said, "Are you aware that this is your anxiety speaking?" I just kind of called the third person, and it paused everything. And then we were able to have a really good conversation. And I've had several times over the years when I've heard her kind of spiraling, if you will, and I've been able to stop and say, "Are you aware that this is anxiety?" And sometimes just going, oh yeah, this isn't real. This is the anxiety talking. Okay, has given her a different access point to be able to manage it. So I think externalizing the anxiety is, it's not you, it's this thing that kind of tries to control you.
What if
and tries to
gave it a name? Like, you realize that this is Clarence who's talking to you right now, or Sally. This is Sally. Don't listen to Sally.
Okay, so John, this is my gremlin. Okay, my gremlin's name is Prudence. She's a cold, calculating, masquerading as a warm, loving Jewish mother. Okay, and I believe in truly giving voice to these voices we have in our heads that make us a little crazy, and externalizing them. And so when my kids were little, I would give them these finger puppets with their gremlins to take to school with them and put them in their pocket. So when they would hear something or they start hearing the voices in their head saying, you're not good enough or you're not worthy or you should be, I get them to like squeeze it or step on it or, whatever they needed to do to remind themselves that that gremlin isn't actually you. It's a voice in your head, but it's not you. So meet prudence.
That is it. That is, we're going to end on that. And but before I say my final thank you, I do want to share this with you. If all of the webinars, including this one, that we've been doing as a gift to all of you to help support what is happening, are on our website, and you can download and watch any of them at any time. It's quite a few. And so at any point in time, you're welcome to go to our website. You can share this with others. This is not a members only thing. Anybody can watch these webinars at any given time. They speak to what we believe and are really excited about what we're doing. Finally, I would like to say that Elaine and I will circle back and we will do a co-webinar on systems, because I'm a huge fan of systems. And anytime I get to spend with you is time that I'm better for. I appreciate what you're doing for the profession. I appreciate what you do for families. And mostly, I just appreciate that you are my dear friend. So thank you so much, Elaine. And folks,
really my pleasure. Thank you.
You can get this on Amazon. You can order it from all kinds of places, but this is absolutely a must read. I have thoroughly, you can see that I've bookmarked all these little spots. You can see how much I've enjoyed this book. So, Elaine, it's my pleasure.
Thank you. And mine as well. Thank you for having me, and I would love to come back. So
all right, and we've got several folks that have said, Anne said, thank you, both amazing webinar, loved every part of it, getting the book. Awesome. Blanca said thank you. Sarah said this has been really helpful. So
I do want to say one thing. I just want to make one pitch to parents, is to remember that information is powerful, and it's just the first step.
That's all,
and it's what you do with the information that matters. Getting the help that you need to figure out how to implement what you're learning from all these webinars is really essential. So don't skip that step. It really, really makes a difference.
And I will tell you that there's a much better than average chance that your kids are going to be doing okay and they're going to be fine. Do you know why?
That's right.
Because you are here.
Because you're here.
That's right. All right. Right. Elaine, take care.
You too, John. Y'all take care, everybody.
Hey, by the way, next month's webinar is a 2-part series on noncompliance, turning no into maybe and maybe into yes. All right. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.